The night air was thick with mist and the faint scent of rain-soaked pine when my car decided to give up on me. The engine sputtered twice, like an old man clearing his throat, and then died altogether. I sat there for a moment in the dark, the dashboard lights fading one by one, the silence pressing in from all sides. The road stretched ahead, empty, indifferent, and utterly still. At my age, 68, and no longer graceful in my movements, the idea of walking miles in heels on a country road was laughable. So, I waited. The moon hung low, brushing the trees in silver when I saw headlights cresting the hill behind me. My pulse quickened, fear and hope in equal measure. The old truck rattled to a stop beside me, and out stepped a young woman, maybe mid-20s, face half hidden beneath a wool cap, eyes kind but wary. "Need a hand, ma'am?" she asked, her voice soft but certain. She didn't hesitate, didn't question my worth or offer pity. Within minutes she was under the hood, grease on her fingers, breath forming little clouds in the cold. When she finished, she refused the money I tried to press into her palm. "Just glad you're safe," she said with a shy smile. "Some folks aren't as lucky on this road." Then she climbed back into her truck and disappeared into the dark. As I drove home, the faint hum of the repaired engine carried me through old thoughts. Kindness, real, unguarded kindness had become such a rare thing that it startled me. It reminded me of a younger version of myself, before the years taught me to keep my generosity behind glass. 20 minutes later, when I pulled into the long gravel driveway of my home, I saw lights blazing in the staff quarters. Voices carried through the open door, sharp, cruel. My daughter's voice, my son's laughter. And then I saw her, the young woman from the roadside, standing there, hands trembling, eyes wide. My children were firing her for being late. She tried to explain, but my daughter cut her off. "Excuses don't matter. If you can't respect our time, you can't work here." They had no idea she had been helping me. They had no idea I'd been standing in the doorway, watching. And they had no idea what I was about to do about it. Sleep never came that night. I sat in the old armchair by the window, the one my late husband used to read in, watching the garden lamps flicker against the fog. The air smelled of wet soil and jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, a lone owl called. It was the kind of silence that invited old memories to crawl out of their corners. I kept seeing her face, the young woman from the roadside. The way her voice shook when she said, "Please," it was Mrs. Whitmore's car. She broke down, I stopped to help. And my daughter's cold reply, "That's not my concern. You're paid to be on time." My daughter. My blood. My disappointment. I raised her in this very house, once warm with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. I taught her that success meant integrity, that wealth meant responsibility. Somewhere along the line, she learned only the first half of the lesson. Power without mercy, an inheritance I never meant to give. As dawn crept in, painting the sky a pale gray, I walked through the house barefoot, my fingers brushing along the mahogany banister, the marble countertops, the portraits lining the hall. Every polished surface reflected a truth I had long ignored. I had built a home of abundance but raised children who knew nothing of gratitude. They managed the business now, our business, built from my husband's sweat and my sacrifices. And they wielded it like a weapon. By mid-morning, I had decided to visit the staff quarters. The young woman, her name was Elena, was gone. Fired without a reference, without a chance. Her locker was empty except for a single folded note left behind. "Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry I failed you." Failed me. The words burned. I felt my age more acutely then, not as weakness, but as distance. Time had given me the luxury of seeing people for who they truly were. And that morning, I saw my children clearly for the first time in years. Their laughter downstairs, carefree and unbothered, sliced through the quiet like glass. Something inside me hardened. Not anger, not yet, but a cold, measured disappointment that settled deep in my bones. I had spent a lifetime protecting this family, cleaning their mistakes, paying their debts, shielding them from consequence. perhaps that had been my greatest mistake of all. I stood before the window, hands clasped behind my back, watching the mist lift from the garden. "You've had your way long enough," I whispered, my voice steady, my heart slower but certain. "It's time you learn what it means to lose something that matters." And just like that, I began to plan. Revenge, I've learned, does not always need to roar. Sometimes, it begins as a whisper, a quiet shifting of balance, a subtle pull on the threads others thought unbreakable. My husband used to say, "Catherine, patience can topple kingdoms." I never truly understood that until now. The plan began in silence. For the first time in years, I attended the staff meetings, the ones my children preferred I skip, claiming they could handle things now. They did not expect me to walk in, hairpin neatly, wearing my old pearls and that calm, unreadable smile they used to fear when they were children. The air changed when I entered. I could feel it, like the pause before a storm. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table, my husband's chair, the one no one had dared occupy since his passing. My son tried to protest, his tone slick with impatience. I let him. Then, I produced the financial ledgers, the real ones, the ones I'd quietly requested from our accountant days before. His face drained of color. You see, while they'd grown entitled, I'd grown watchful. Decades of running this family taught me where every number hid, where every favor was buried. The company my husband built with sweat and calloused hands had become their plaything, inflated invoices, gifts written off as expenses, petty cruelty disguised as leadership. The staff tolerated it because they feared losing their livelihood. But I remembered every name, including Elena's. Over the next week, I began to make small changes. A call to our investors here, a quiet lunch with the board chair there. I didn't shout or accuse, I simply reminded them who had signed the first charter, who still owned majority shares, who had the final word when it mattered. By the third week, I'd reinstated Elena, not as a maid, but as my personal assistant. I called her myself. She hesitated at first, her voice trembling with disbelief. When she arrived, I noticed her truck was gone, replaced with a borrowed bicycle. The sight of her humility stirred something tender in me. "You did nothing wrong," I told her as she stood in the doorway. "You were punished for being kind. That ends now." Downstairs, my daughter's laughter still echoed, brittle and self-assured. She didn't yet realize the ground beneath her was shifting, slowly, deliberately, beneath her manicured feet. Every smile I gave her after that carried weight. Every pause in conversation was a warning wrapped in civility. And as I watched her flinch at the new silence in the house, I felt no triumph, only purpose. Revenge, after all, wasn't about rage. It was about balance. And balance, I was beginning to restore. There's a peculiar stillness that comes before truth reveals itself, like the hush before a bird takes flight. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely touched the curtains, painting thin lines of gold across my old oak desk. The house, once alive with chatter and footsteps, was quiet now. Too quiet. It was the day everything would come undone. I sat in the study, the same room where my husband once planned every business deal, and opened the letter I had written the night before, addressed to both my children. The ink was steady, my handwriting deliberate. It wasn't a letter of anger, but of record, a statement of what I knew, what I'd seen, and what would happen next. At precisely 9, I called a company-wide meeting. My son and daughter arrived fashionably late, still unaware. The board members sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting between us as I stood. "Before we begin," I said, "I want to discuss integrity." My son smirked. My daughter rolled her eyes. I pressed a button on the remote and the projector hummed to life. One by one, the documents appeared on the screen, falsified expense reports, unapproved transfers, messages between my children mocking the employees, mocking me. Gasps rippled across the room. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned to face them. "You've treated this company like an inheritance," I said quietly, "when it was a trust. Your father built it so that people could live, not so you could feed your vanity. My daughter's face went pale. My son's jaw clenched. He started to speak, but I held up a trembling hand. No. You will listen now. And they did. For the first time in years, they listened. I explained how I had transferred majority voting rights back to myself. How I had arranged for a full audit. How both of them would be temporarily suspended from operations pending investigation. I made it sound bureaucratic and procedural, but they knew it was far more personal than that. When I finished, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector cooling down. My children stared at me as though they'd never seen me before, not the fragile old woman they'd dismissed, but something sharper, older, and infinitely more dangerous. As the meeting adjourned, Elena entered quietly, carrying my tea. The board members nodded to her with newfound respect. My daughter's face twisted in disbelief. She understood now, this wasn't just punishment, it was a mirror. After the room cleared, my son stayed behind. His eyes were wet, though his pride fought the tears. You planned this for months, he said bitterly. I smiled faintly. No, I replied. For years. You just gave me the reason to act. That evening, as I watched the sunset bleed across the horizon, I felt the weight of time pressing on me, not guilt, not regret, but the quiet ache of justice long overdue. Revenge, I realized, had aged with me. It no longer burned. It simply settled, calm, final, inevitable. Tomorrow, the world would see what my children had done. But tonight, I allowed myself a single whisper of peace. The storm had passed. The morning after the storm was eerily calm. The sky had that washed-out look, pale and uncommitted, like it couldn't decide whether to cry or forgive. I sat on the veranda with a cup of tea, listening to the slow groan of the garden gate in the wind. For the first time in months, no one called, no one argued, no one demanded my signature on anything. Silence had returned to my life, though it felt heavier than I'd imagined. The newspapers were merciless. Family empire in turmoil, they wrote, plastering my children's names beside words like embezzlement, nepotism, and disgrace. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in seeing your own flesh undone by truth, even when that truth was necessary. Justice has no sweetness, only balance. I visited Elena that afternoon. She was back at work, her uniform crisp, her hair tied in a loose braid. When she saw me, her eyes widened with something like fear, or perhaps awe. She tried to thank me, but I stopped her. No, I told her softly. Don't thank me for doing what should have been done long ago. Thank yourself for being kind when you had every reason not to. She nodded, tears threatening to fall. The baby inside her shifted, a tiny ripple beneath her hand. I reached out instinctively, my old fingers trembling against the curve of her belly. Life fragile, uncorrupted, and beginning again. That night, I returned home and walked through the halls that once echoed with laughter. Dust caught the evening light like ghosts in motion. On the wall hung portraits of my children smiling, young, untouched by greed. I lingered before them for a long while. I failed you, I whispered. But I failed myself first. As the clock ticked in the distance, I realized revenge hadn't freed me, it had only finished what time had already started. My children would rebuild or they wouldn't, that was no longer my concern. I had drawn the line, not out of hatred, but to remind them and myself that decency, once lost, must be fought for, even at the cost of love. Outside, the night folded around the house like an old coat. I sat by the fire until it died into ash, my heart quiet, my hands empty but steady. Somewhere far away, I imagined my husband's voice, calm, proud, weary. You did what had to be done, Catherine, he said. And for the first time in years, I believed him. The world doesn't reward the patient, nor the just. But sometimes, if you wait long enough, it remembers you, not for your vengeance, but for your resolve. And so, as dawn broke again, I closed my eyes and let the light in.